Welcome back, gang. Here we are with assignment number 6, and we just finished up going over new things about algebra, right? We talked about expressions, which we already knew what expressions were, but now we have some letters in them, how to approach those, and then we learned a little bit about how to identify some parts of it. Today, we're going to talk about properties in mathematics. These are things that you already know to be true. For example, you guys already know that 2 plus 3 is the same as 3 plus 2, right? Because it gives you the same answer. We also know that, for example, 3 times 2 is the same as 2 times 3. Now, we know those things, but there is a property, and in mathematics, properties are facts, right? Things that we know to be true, always for all numbers. And what says that it's true, that no matter what you add together, if you add them in different orders, you get the same answer. Same thing with multiplication. If you multiply two things together or a few things together, it does not matter what order you multiply them in. The property that says this is true is called the commutative property. Now, technically, it's the commutative property of addition that says this, and the commutative property of multiplication that says this. Notice there is no subtraction or division, because it's not true for subtraction and division. We only have the commutative property of these two things. Doesn't matter what order they're in, they could change orders, and it's still a true statement. That's the commutative property. Again, something you may have already known. The next property we have says that with adding and subtracting adding and multiplication, not including subtracting and division, still not including those, only with multiplication and adding, the associative property is next. And this property says that if you have a couple numbers being added together, let's say 2 plus 3 plus 4, that you are allowed to group up the 2 and the 3 first and add those together if you want to. Or, keeping them in the same order, 2 plus 3 plus 4, you can choose to do the 3 plus 4 first. Excuse me. And this answer will still be the same thing. For example, if you do 2 plus 3, you get 5 plus 4 is 9. But down here, if you decide to do this first, 3 plus 4, you get 7 plus 2 is still 9. Okay? And this also works with multiplication. Let's say we're doing 2 times 3 times 4. Hopefully we know that a dot, just a straight dot in between those numbers, that means multiplication as well. I really love to use parentheses instead, but trust me, no more X's. This, no matter if they're in the same order, if you decide you want to group the 2 and the 3 together to multiply first, you can do that. Or you can group the 3 and the 4 together first, and you will still get the same answer. The property that says you are allowed to do this is the associative property. And the key word there to help you remember this is associate, right? The word associate means to group together, right? Somebody will ask you, who do you associate with? They're probably asking you about your friends, right? And that means the people that you are grouped with. So the associative property is talking about grouping, okay? Just because there's parentheses and something does not mean it's associative property. I'll get to that in a minute. But it's about how numbers are grouped together. Notice how the 2 and 3 are grouped together here and 3 and 4 are grouped together here. That's different. 2 and the 3 here, 3 and the 4 here, that's different grouping. So it's different grouping, we're probably dealing with the associative property. And the last property, again, like I said, you guys know this stuff. There is a property that says this is true. 32 plus 0 equals 32. Did you know that? Did you know that if you add 0 to something, it stays the same? Did you also know that if you took 32 and you multiplied it by 1, it would stay 32, right? There is a property that actually says this stuff is true, which we already know, right? We know that if you add 0 to something, it doesn't change. We know that if you multiply something by 1, it stays the same, right? And the property that says this, I'm just going to add a name to it. Whoa, don't read that. The identity property, right? Identity, right? Identity is who you are, right? So if you think about the identity property, we're thinking like 32 is a 32, and if you add 0 to it, it stays who it is, right? So the identity property just says something stays the same. And the only way those two things happen is adding a 0 or multiplying by 1. Remember, subtraction and division do not apply to these properties here. So what does this look like in practice then? I'm going to ask you guys to identify and tell me what property is going on here. So let's take this one for example. Number 1 here. We've got 15 plus, and in parentheses 5 plus 8. And over here we've got 15 plus 5 in parentheses plus 8. So you got to tell me, is this a true statement? And tell me which property says it's true. Well, I've got 3 properties here: commutative, associative, and identity. If it was a commutative property, then these would change order. I've got 15, 5, 8. I've got 15, 5, 8. Those numbers did not change order, so therefore this is not the commutative property. No numbers commuted around. It also does not look like the identity property because we're not adding 0 or multiplying by 1 in any of these. So it must be the associative property. Remember, the associative property says that you are allowed to change the grouping during an adding or multiplication problem, and it won't change the answer. Well, it looks like in this one we grouped the 5 and the 8 together, and it looks like on this expression we grouped the 15 and the 5 together. Will that change the answer? No. Why? Because the associative property. I should probably write the word associative property. There we go. We're not gonna abbreviate that one. We're gonna go associative property there. We're just gonna pretend we didn't, try to abbreviate that. The associative property here, and yes, these are equivalent. Okay, moving on. Okay, next one, number 2. Determine if these are equivalent and tell me what property says they are. Well, it looks like 20, 12, 3, 20, 12, 3. It's not commutative. They didn't change places. But the grouping changed, so it must be associative. Or maybe I'm trying to trick you because this isn't adding or multiplication. This is subtraction, and the associative property does not apply to subtraction. So these are not equivalent. Not equivalent. Dead giveaway because it's subtraction. Next one, 34 plus 0 and 34. Are those two expressions equivalent to each other? Is 34 plus 0 the same as 34? Absolutely. And what property says that is...
Please report to the preschool hallway. Dante, please report to the preschool hallway. Thank you.
Yes, 34 plus 0 and 34 are the same thing, right? Because 34 plus 0 is 34. And the property that says this is the identity property. Here's an example. 20 divided by 5 and 5 divided by 20. Ooh, they just changed positions, right? So that is commutative property. It's commuted around, except for its division, and this doesn't apply to division, so not equivalent. Let's go ahead. Let me give you a couple examples of what you guys are going to see. Killing a lot of trees here today, guys. That are going to be the properties, but they're going to look a little bit different. For example, let me show you 2 expressions where the commutative property is at work, but it looks like associative. Watch this. 2 plus 3 plus 4. And let's go with 4 plus 2 plus 3. Take a look at these 2 expressions real quick. Some would say, oh, well, that's definitely associative property because the grouping changed. But if you look closely, the grouping did not change in this. The 2 plus 3 is grouped together in this one, and the 2 plus 3 is grouped together in this one. So the grouping did not change, but the order did change. This was being added to 4. Now it's 4 being added to this. They actually switched spots, if you see that. And that right there, what says you are allowed to move things around is the commutative property. So be careful. I'll show you another example here. It might be, say, 4 times C times 7. And then we might have 7 times 4 times C. Now you'll notice here that this looks like the parentheses shifted around showing the associative property, but it didn't because the 4 times C is still grouped together. What changed is the order of them, right? Instead of this times 7, it was 7 times this. And that is what's being moved around. That's called the commutative property, not the associative property. So pay close attention to that one too, guys. There's a couple examples of some things that you'll see in there. If you have some questions about it, please ask me. Good luck on your assignment, and I will see you guys in class.